Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominic and Bryan.
In this episode, we're doing something different. This is Bryan and my reaction to an interview that we released earlier this week, our conversation with Paul Brunson entitled Billionaire Habits from a Man Who Owns 10 Businesses. Now, we're trying something new to see if you might like it and we can do more of these in the future, because the majority of our podcast, it's just Bryan and I talking about some topics that are particularly interesting to you, our audience. In the recent months, we've started bringing on guests who are experts in their field that you want to hear from. And one of the things that people reach out to us about afterwards is they want to know, what is our opinion? What did we think about the podcast? What do we think about some of the things that were shared? And usually when we're in interview mode, Bryan and I aren't pontificating or adding our perspective. So this episode, we're doing exactly that. So I hope you enjoy it and let us know if you're down with it. We could do it again in the future. Paul Brunson, man, I knew that we were interviewing an interesting guy. I had no idea the depth with which this man intelligence ran, his business acumen. And so you're talking about a guy who's got 10 businesses. His mentor is Oprah Winfrey. He's considered to be the modern day Hitch of the matchmaking arena. And also, he's got the journalistic distinction of interviewing more billionaires than any other journalist and distilling their secrets, which came out in a lot of how he builds his life and constructs his rituals. So if you haven't listened to the podcast that we did with him, go back and check that first, because there's a lot of gold to mine in there.
And depth is the right word, because I know, Dominic, we had probably 12 questions that we wanted to get through with Paul. We got to 2.
Yeah, we did.
Right? We're going to have him on 6 more times in order to cover off on, I think, a lot of the gems that he does have. And I've taken a look at his YouTube channel, at his Instagram. There are like 6-minute segments, all gems.
That's right. And the reason why I'd invited him on the podcast was because I heard him speak at a matchmaking conference where he was asked about his morning routine. And you and I are big fans of morning routines, right? We did a lot of research on morning routines, but he was the only person who had ever said, or that I'd ever come across, who said, yeah, as a part of my morning routine, I make love to my wife 3 to 5 days a week. And that sent my antenna up. Most of the people in the room were incredulous. Like, they couldn't believe that was possible, especially because he's got 2 young children, a 5 and an 8-year-old. Like, how is that possible? So when we invited him on, that was really the idea, and the focus and the intent was to unpack that. We didn't even get to that until like the final, I don't know, after 45 or 50 minutes, because there was so much wisdom about how he constructed his day, where he learned it, the books he reads. And so I think we're going to take, the next 25 minutes or so and talk about our reflections on what we took away from what we learned from Paul.
Well, I'm ready. If I sound especially good today, it's because I got my morning routine in today.
How'd it go, man?
I got the whole thing in.
Yeah, what was the whole
Now,
thing?
I didn't make love to anybody, but that's not part of my morning routine.
Not even yourself?
Not even myself. No, there was no time for that this morning. But I did get my morning routine in, and I haven't the last couple of days. I feel like things have slowed down in the best of ways.
Yeah.
And that's great. And when I look at, and Paul talked about his morning routine, I was like, whoa, this guy gets up at, what do you say, 4:30?
4:30.
4:30 in the morning. And I'm starting to see this trend of these very successful guys, a guy that has 10 jobs, or 10 roles at the very least, getting up this early. And there's something to it. I don't think I'll ever be a 4:30 guy.
Yeah, well, he goes to bed at 9:30, right? He said that. And it seems to be a thing with family men. By the way, women do this too, but we're just talking mainly in the context of men right now, is that if you want to take back command of your own time, it seems like you need to get up earlier than the rest of your family so you can have that alone time. And one of the things that he said that was really interesting, he goes, I was successful, I was busy, I was running multiple businesses. This was maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, before he'd implemented a morning routine. Everything was a reaction. I was reacting to everything in my life, and everything was about, how do I fit in my workout? How do I fit in intimacy time with my wife? How do I fit in working out? How do I fit? Like, it was all these fitting in. And he was like, and it never happened. I was constantly being pulled everywhere. And he said the real pivot point for him was when he decided, I'm going to get up early. I don't think we got into this, but I would imagine it was a pretty difficult transition because getting up at 4:30 a.m. sounds like it sucks. I only do it when I get up like on flights, right? And it blows. And he's doing this on a regular basis. But what he said was, over time, he's like, the state that I am in after I finish my reading, after I finish my working out, after I finish like real quality time with my wife, I'm ready to tackle the day, man. There's an ease and a confidence that follows with me. And the work that I do after that is uninterrupted and it's focused.
Yeah, he comes out of the gates shooting red hot as opposed to slowly walking into it. And the words that struck me in the very beginning, the word he starts with is the me time, or in this case, the him time.
Yeah.
And all of it, from the time he wakes up and says a prayer, to the time that he reads, to the time that he works out, even to the time that he picks up his phone for the first time, it's about him and getting himself into a good state as opposed to getting up and boom, giving out to the rest of the world, whoever that may be. Yeah. Because then he can shoot out of the gates.
Totally.
And that part really, like, do you first, really resonated with me.
And this is one of the things that I hear from especially family men who are in their, let's say, late 30s to early 50s. It's the time of their lives where they have more responsibility at work than ever. They're trying to raise a young family along with their partner. They probably have aging parents now that there's a consideration there. And there's so many mouths that are looking up at them to be fed and so much responsibility on their shoulders. And they've wanted it that way. They built it that way. But what ends up happening is that they feel that their person disappears. Their freedom disappears. Their energy starts to dissipate. Everything is like a pull on their time and their attention. And Paul was feeling that. And what he ended up saying is like, by making this shift, I felt like I had command back. I was calling my shots, the most important things. Like, I have time with my kids. I have time with my wife. And so this is one of the things where there's no shortage of people who will tell you that there's not enough time. There's no shortage of people who say, it's really hard to find intimate time with my wife when we have all of these kids and all these responsibilities. And what we're interested in are not those conversations. We're interested in like the guys like Paul who have figured out the way.
Yeah, how are they doing it?
Yep. And I imagine there's people who've listened to Paul's story who are like, oh, well, he's an entrepreneur, so he can design his day however he wants. And oh, it must be nice that he can drop his kids off at school and then come home and have coffee with his wife and lounge around until 10:30 a.m. Okay, of course, not everyone is going to have those flexibilities. But if you're going to look at the one thing or the two things that don't fit your lifestyle and then dismiss everything else that's been done, that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He is a man who has a family who's figured out some stuff. And it's working. So take what you heard from him that works and start to implement that. And you and I talked about this in the morning routine, Bryan, which was going from where you are to, say, where someone like Paul Brunson is. It could be a Grand Canyon size gap and it can feel overwhelming. But what's that first step that you could take, right, to take command back? And maybe the first step is just getting up earlier before your family.
Well, talk about that first step. So he did leave us a little hack that I hadn't heard before that I really enjoyed. And that was, he doesn't make any major decisions in the morning.
Right.
That was brilliant for me because he's setting out his clothes. He knows the book that he's going to read. He's going through literally a routine, just seamlessly one to the next without making any major decisions.
Well, wait, so did he say no major decisions, or was it those like small decisions that he didn't want to have to make that was going to pull on his time and his energy?
Good point. Maybe it wasn't the major decisions. It was any
right.
real decisions at all. Everything as small as what am I going to wear to what am I going to read.
Yeah.
And I love that because I know for me, like even if I'm going to the gym and I don't have something planned, it's harder to get there. It's harder to figure out in the moment what I'm going to work out that day. And so I like that. The hack for me is actually the night before it starts with what am I going to wear? Being very intentional about that in the morning so I don't have to think about it.
So when I do these temporary abstinence periods from, let's say, like TV or Netflix or coffee or dessert or alcohol, whatever it is, I've always found that it is way easier to do zero, like to make the one decision at the beginning, let's say for the next 21 days, I'm going to do no caffeine. For the next 21 days, I'm going to do no television, no alcohol. I find it to be easier to do zero than to allot myself, I'm going to have 3 days of dessert over the next 21 days. I'm going to have like 5 days that I can watch television over the next 21 days, because every day I have to burn mental energy considering, is today the day? Do I want to use this like one dessert coupon for today? Do I want to watch
and
the
this
one
whole time, Dominic, I thought you were just an extremist. I'm like, yeah, he does everything.
Right. It sounds
but it's
extreme.
easier.
It's easier because like you make one decision, and then you just reinforce it every day. Like I don't have to burn calories thinking about it, because I've tried it the other way. And actually I fall apart. Like I'm not very disciplined when I have like, okay, 5 tickets to use over the 21 days. It's much easier. It's the same principle that you're talking about here. He doesn't have to think about what clothes do I put on? Am I going to work out today? It's just like, it just happens. So he said the word, it's pretty mechanical. That is a habit that goes on autopilot, that uses very little energy, that supports a lifestyle that works for him.
And one thing he talks about then is he lays out his clothes. He knows what book he's going to read. And Dominic, let's dive into the book reading, because I think we took a hiatus in his morning routine, and we took a 25-minute diversion during the podcast to talk about the veracity with which Paul reads.
100 books a year, right?
Wild.
Somewhere between an hour to 2 hours every single morning. And he was like, I wasn't even a reader until 4 years ago, right? He didn't read his first full book until like, I don't know, senior year of high school, which he made it sound like that's uncommon. But I don't remember finishing any of the books I was assigned to.
You guys are terrible students. What is wrong with you guys? How do you pass the reading test? Like, how do you...
You read enough of the book to bullshit whatever summary or whatever, like that, like assignment that's
This is why I'm less efficient, because I actually read the damn book.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Thanks, teachers that gave me A's and screwed me up the rest of my life.
Yeah. All right. So you and I are big readers. And I thought that I've heard most of the hacks, most of the like the best ways to read books. And I found that his process was illuminating for me, right? So he said when he wants to become, well, I guess the first thing he does is like he identifies a category that he wants to become proficient in. I want to be proficient in habits. I want to be proficient in relationships. I want to, whatever it is, productivity. And then he finds like 3 of the best books. And he picks like from 3 different eras. And you know what? I think Tim Ferriss talks about this. He's like, pick a classic, pick something that's more recent bestseller, maybe in the past like 20 years, and then pick the one that's like the hottest now. And that's what he does. And he reads them in chronological order.
I love this. I love the depth with which this brings. I do not do that.
Never done that.
I'll pick my title, right? That's my category. I'll read the book and then move on to the next wild thing.
Yeah. There's a utility to doing the way you do it too, right? It's like, let me pick one book and then move on to the next book that could be in a totally different genre. For him, it's kind of like you read 3 books and you go deep. Tim Ferriss said this a while ago. I can't remember where I read it. He goes, expertise, in quotations, expertise is such a loose thing. Like, what do you need to become an expert in something? And he goes, actually, I've kind of found that if you read 3 of the best books in a particular category, don't call yourself an expert. You've acquired a certain level of expertise that you can use to create a presentation, to write a blog post, to speak intelligently about. And so I can see maybe some of the influence on Paul here. So he's picked those 3 books. He reads them in chronological order, and he says, I can see how each one builds on the other, how they reference each other.
I think the quote was, the greats reference the greats.
Yeah.
Right? And when you're reading them in chronological order, that makes a whole lot of sense, because they're building on, they're evolving that thought that the greats had in the past. So I love this idea.
Me too. And he talked about like habits. I forget the first author that he was talking about for habits, but it was like maybe something like 30 years ago, the man who wrote the book. And then it was Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit, which I know I read maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And then we talked about Atomic Habits by James Clear, which just came out in the past year, which is a New York Times bestseller. That's how it would be done in the arena of relationships. I don't know, like men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And then you go to the 5 love languages. And then I don't know, like what would be something that just came out recently? Maybe Esther Perel's The State of Affairs, right? Like you could do this over and over and over again and get real smart, real fast. Yeah.
And then he gave us we won't go through it in detail here because you can listen to it in the podcast, but like what he does with those books in terms of how he downloads all of that information. I mean, this guy is reading 3 books a week. And from, 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., that's his reading time?
Yes.
And so check out how he downloads all of this into his brain, locks it in, and I can tell it works. So it's one thing for him to sit there and tell us this is what he does, but I know that it works because I've seen his videos, and I can see that he's putting his wrapper, his view, his lens on all this stuff he's reading and bringing it to users in like really clear, concise, and like Paul type ways.
Yes.
And I love that.
Me too. And let's spend a minute talking about this, because I have a lot of conversations with a lot of people about books. And when they tell me, oh yeah, I read that book. And I'm like, great. What was the thing that like really stood out to you? And you could see that like the information has just dissipated, right? Like
it was really good.
It was good.
It taught me
habits,
history.
I learned that habits are important. It's like, okay, well, what's the layer down? Like I know that I've been in that place before. Like reading a book, for some reason, it's hard to retain unless you actively read. And this is what Paul, I think, does really well. I've done the underlining thing, right? Underline an important sentence, but like the underlining isn't enough. It's something that like my memory will fade pretty quickly. What he does at the end of every chapter is he summarizes that chapter in like 2 sentences, right? What did I learn from this chapter? What was the key point? That triggers a different part of the brain that creates this, instead of I'm just consuming information, now I'm actively thinking about it. And now I have to actively process it and then write down. And so as you're writing it down, because he reads hardcover books and like physically writes it down, that deepens the knowledge. It drops into your brain in a certain kind of way. And one of the other things that he talked about that I thought was brilliant, finish the book, put it on the bookshelf, let a week go by, then come back to the book, scan through your notes, look at the chapter summaries, and then write, I don't know, what was like a paragraph, or write like a
top 3. Like what if you were to tell someone about this book, like what it was for you, that's what we write down. 1, 2, 3.
Yes. And that one I've never done before, which is really important. I'm going to start to implement that, because there's something that I learned. I can't remember where this was. I think it might have been from like a neuroscience conference I was at, where they said one of the key things in learning is space between the content that you're learning. If you learn it all in one day and you never revisit it again, it's going to leak out like a leaky bucket. But if you learn something in one day and then you go back to it after a period of time and then you re-engage with it and then do the extra step that Paul's doing, which is writing down the paragraph, it drops it in at a different level in your hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for memory and retention and automatic recall. So if you're going to spend the time reading, you may as well do it in a way where it's going to benefit you and like you're going to retain that information. And you can see with this man, changed his entire lifestyle over the last 4 years by consuming these books and taking an active engagement.
I would be so curious, and this is a question we didn't get to in the podcast, but Paul, if you're listening, we're coming at you with this question at some point. His hack, what Dominic just described, is great for physical books.
Right.
I consume books on audio. I consume books on Kindle. I consume books on like hardcover books. I wonder like how I can implement. I of course try to take notes when I'm listening to audio if that's possible, but I would love to understand like the hacks across the different devices.
Yes.
I always wonder when I see a guy like Paul, where does this guy have the time to pump out the content that he has? And like with what he told us, now I get it, because he's creating his own content as he's reading the book. And by the time he gets on video, by the time he's recording an audio, he's already there. He's already got those nuggets. He's not sitting like what I do in front of a computer for hours and hours and hours with a blank-ish page being like, what was the takeaway?
Totally.
So 3 weeks after I read the book.
Yeah. And then it's gone.
It's gone.
Yeah. One of the things that Paul didn't talk in depth about on this and on our conversation, but in our research, I found this out about him. He said, the only way that you can run 10 businesses and be a good husband and be a good father and have time for yourself is that you have to constantly, vigilantly look for those connection points, those alignment points where all things come together and support one another. And so what you just talked about is you could look at his morning routine of reading a book as just a personal development thing. It's like a just for him thing, right? But actually, it informs a lot of his content that he produces for social media. So now it's not just supporting his own personal development, but it supports how he markets, right? It supports his mentoring business. It supports, I can't imagine how many other places that it supports, but it's not done as this isolated thing on the side that's just a Paul thing. He's learned how to integrate that. And so as you're thinking about, and I say you, like the listener, as you're thinking about carving out more time for yourself. How can you look at that not as this mutually exclusive thing that comes at the sacrifice of something else, right? Sacrificing your business or sacrificing family time, but actually that it somehow aligns with those things. 'Cause that's the only way that a man like Paul could do all those things as successfully as he's doing.
Yeah, finding those intersections. Where does it dovetail? And not everything is just a new creation. Totally. That's a huge lesson for me. I loved that.
Let's talk about Oprah, man, because you and I are big fans about alignment, right? First of all, the fact that this man has been able to attract Oprah into his life as a mentor speaks volumes about him. And what I loved about his story, because it was so humbling, I mean, it goes to show you that weird shit can happen that can't be explained rationally when you are in your purpose, in your passion. Things just seem to line up, right? And this is like Paul's, not to go too deep into his story, but the high points were Paul was an investment banking analyst, decided to leave that profession to become the modern day Hitch, right? Everyone thought that he was crazy giving up that lifestyle.
And modern day Hitch is essentially a dating coach.
A dating coach. Hitch, if you haven't seen the movie, Will Smith is right. So he spends a year, and I wish I would have asked him this question. He spends a year just becoming an expert in the matchmaking. He didn't even launch his business. He was studying, he was taking on pro bono clients and doing work for free so that he could earn the right to launch a business in a year where he was like, I'm going to be a matchmaker. And during that period of time, he said he invested shitloads of money, basically the last few dollars that he had saved to create this video series, 12 videos on how to, attract the partner of your dreams. And he was like, it was going to be amazing. Launch this thing. And each of the videos, one after another, got 11 views. Yeah.
11 likes, 11. I think you said of the 11, 9 of them were his mom, right? Yeah. Exactly. I mean, how frustrating is that? How frustrating is it you spend your last dollars on these videos that are going to be amazing, and then nothing?
Dude, I can relate to that, man. Like I've put stuff out before and I could feel my gut clenching. I'm like, oh man, been there. Put your heart and soul into something, and he left his work behind. People thought he was crazy, and he was probably feeling, oh my God, were they right? Am I going to have to go back with my tail between my legs? But then the part of the story that popped up was one of his clients, his pro bono clients, was a senior writer for Oprah on Oprah's magazine. And she was with Oprah at this point in time where Oprah was like, I want to be launching a TV show on the O Network or the Oprah's channel. We need a matchmaker that's TV ready. The senior writer ended up showing Paul's video to Oprah, and she was like, this is the guy. And then that was the thing that launched him to national prominence because he got a show, he was working with Oprah. Is there any greater endorsement that you could ever get than her? And his life has taken off from there.
And what I liked what he said about that, it wasn't just Oprah's following that got him to accelerate to where he is today, but it was her mentorship and him being able to see her perspective that actually she's a human being going through the same stuff. And she's got her things that she's going through. And maybe it's at a different level in some areas of her life and in other areas of her life. But I can see now what's possible.
Totally.
I think between that and Oprah's following, right, just became a huge accelerator in his life.
Yeah, what he talked about was this idea of relatability and covetability. He didn't say those words, but we tend to put billionaires on a pedestal. And he worked for a family of billionaires. And he also interviewed more billionaires as a journalist than anyone else, than any other journalist in the game. And then he also learned from Oprah, one of the most successful people of history. The amazing thing was to be able to see the human beingness of those people that we put up on this pedestal.
Do you put people on pedestals, Tom?
Yeah, I have. For sure.
Do you still? I know you put them on your vision boards.
Yeah, to a degree, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So I'm looking at my vision board right now. Daryl Davis was one of them. And we, obviously, if you haven't listened to that podcast, go back and listen to it. Marie Kondo from The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. I do put her on this pedestal because I look at her and I say, man, she's figured out a way to make the most boring, mundane, terrible thing, tidying up, and turn it into this movement that has caused people to spark joy. And she's doing what she loves. And she's creating joy and excitement in millions of people. She's got a Netflix television show that was #1 on Netflix. And I'm like, I want that.
Dominic,
for us.
what I like about you is that you will put somebody on a pedestal, like let's say Marie Kondo, and then you will reach out to them and say, hi, I'm Dominic Ortuccio. I would love to have you on our podcast or sit down and have coffee with you. You do a really great job of that. What I see in my life sometimes is I put people up on a pedestal. I'm like, they're untouchable. Like let them stay on that pedestal and I don't want to go anywhere near them. And so that's something I'm working on is in terms of like, okay, like they're on the pedestal and they're also human and they've got an amazing perspective and we can work together in some way, shape, or form.
Up until this past year, I was the same way. I put someone on a pedestal and I thought untouchable. And what I found is that like no one is untouchable. And if anything, like, my experience with Daryl Davis and reaching out to him and like just getting the, hey, let's go do this. And then him spending 3 hours, I think it matters how you go to people. And it matters, like, do they feel like you're honoring their work? Do they feel like you're just taking something from them or, extracting? And my experience has been that no one's untouchable. Everyone wants to share their gifts and wants to be seen. And so I'm just going to continue going out more and more and
it
level that
seems so
playing
obvious,
field.
right? Well, social media, we can reach out and direct messages and everything else. But we don't do it. And when I say we don't do it, I don't do it. Right?
Yeah, we can change that right now.
We can change that in an instant. So I think there's a process in that which you've gone through with vision boarding and honoring their work.
Totally.
Is a really big one. Dominic, we've only got a few minutes left here, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't go back to what we started with, which was the morning routine and intimacy, sex with his wife.
Yes.
How did this come to be?
Yeah. He was saying that he learned his wife's love languages, which were gifts and quality time. And he said that was a game changer for him because what he started to realize was he didn't have much time dedicated specifically to spending time with his wife, which then became a part of their morning routine. After they dropped the kids off from school, then they go get breakfast together every day. And sometimes it's just like they bring it home, snarf it down, and then get to work.
Snarf, great word.
Have you not used that word?
I haven't heard snarf in a long time.
Is it because like it needs to be retired or because...
I like it.
Okay, cool.
It's
so
in.
It's still relevant?
It's in.
Cool. So they snarf for the breakfast, and he goes, sometimes it's just like the gift thing doesn't have to be some grand gesture. It could just be like, I know the muffin she likes. Or we're coffee snobs. I know what kind of coffee is going to tickle her fancy. And then we're going to go home, and we're going to spend some time together, maybe lay together on the couch or on the bed and just talk. And as I'm spending this quality time with her, it creates that constant state of seduction that you and I have spoken about. Women have taught us this on our Women Teach Men podcast that we did. Women want to feel this constant state of seduction that like you're seeing them and understanding what pushes their buttons and what gets them going and turns them on so that like when it's time for intimacy. And he said when the kids are not in the house, right? Like not in the house. And so the kids are at school because they can be totally relaxed with each other. And if something unfolds, they don't have to worry about is someone going to come barging in. Like they're totally connected with one another. And he's like, it's not uncommon for us to make love 3 to 5 days a week. And I guess he also said the caffeine helps as well because the caffeine's a stimulant. Our bodies are going. She's done her in the morning too. This was the other important thing. She has a me time morning routine also. He didn't go into much detail, but he's like, she's worked out in the morning too. So we've both done us.
Yeah, we have two people in a heightened state, ready to rock the day. Then they come together, create this constant state of awareness. And for me, what came out of this was the thing that like we all want and have.
So focused on.
It's a byproduct.
Yes.
It's something that just happens naturally through this state that's been created both internally self and externally together.
Totally. And this came from a place where they weren't having sex at all for many years of their marriage. He said he was sleeping on the couch at certain points. Like their relationship was fractured and that they almost went separate ways, right? I mean, like there could have been a very different life for he and his wife, and they ended up turning it around to something that seems almost unbelievable, making love 3 to 5 days a week. Now, let's set the expectation appropriately. He said, listen, it's not like every week goes down like that. Right? Not that every day I have this perfect morning routine, but like this is what I strive for. And the days that I do it and the days that we get to connect like that, me and my wife, it's amazing. So as you're listening to this and thinking about, hey, like he's built this and his wife have built this to a place where any of us would aspire to, how can you start now? Like how can you do brick by brick and get to a place where it feels like, man, I've got command back of me time. I've got command back of our time. Final thing here was he goes, there was a point in our relationship where we were both so caught up in our own BS, and we finally decided to stop looking at ourselves and to look at us. We prioritized us over me and me. When we did that, then we were able to co-create this environment that worked for us and make decisions that contributed to both of us versus our own selfish interests. And that, again, is one of the bedrocks that creates that safe container, that vibrant container for them to connect intimately.
I feel like that's maybe question 13 we ask him for next time, is how he created the we out of the me and the me. I'd like to learn more about that myself. So if you haven't checked out the podcast, go check it out, get the details, but that's what came up for us.
Yeah, and we're going to have Paul back on at some point in the future. So if you have any questions that you want us to ask him, send them our way. Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.